The Hoplon. The Hoplon weighs between 15 and 30 pounds, carved from a single piece of wood, usually poplar or oak, and faced with a thin sheet of hammered bronze. It measures roughly 3 feet in diameter. You can see one in the British Museum, dented and scarred, pulled from a tomb in Thebes. This shield defines the phalanx. At Marathon in 490 BCE, 10,000 Athenian hoplites locked their shields together and charged the Persian army. The overlapping bronze discs created a continuous barrier, each man's shield protecting the soldier to his left. The porpax, a central armband, and the anti-labe grip at the rim allowed warriors to hold formation even as spears and arrows struck the bronze facing. Herodotus describes the sound, a massive crash of bronze on bronze as the Greek line collided with Persian wicker shields. The Chigi vase from Corinth, dated to 650 BCE, shows hoplites advancing with shields overlapped, spears leveled, crests streaming. Archaeological evidence from Olympia reveals hundreds of hoplon fragments dedicated as offerings after victories. These weren't decorative pieces. The bronze facing is thin, designed to deflect rather than stop, while the wood core absorbed impact. Spartans painted the Greek lambda on their shields. Athenians favored gorgon faces or owls. Theban shields bore clubs, symbols of Heracles. At Thermopylae in 480 BCE, when a Persian arrow shattered Leonidas' shield, he fought with the wooden remnant until the Spartans fell. The hoplon's design forced collective courage. You couldn't run without exposing your neighbor. Breaking formation meant death for everyone. This wasn't just equipment. It was philosophy made tangible, the physical embodiment of return with your shield or on it. The Scutum. The Scutum stands 4 feet tall and curves around the soldier's body. Roman legionaries carried these laminated wood constructions, thin strips of birch or oak glued in 3 layers, then covered with linen and hide, edged with bronze, and faced with a central iron boss. The Doncaster Scutum, discovered in a Roman fort in Britain, still bears its red paint and yellow lightning bolt design after 1,900 years. Vigetius writes in the 4th century CE that recruits spent months learning to fight behind the Scutum, practicing strikes and blocks until movement became instinct. The shield weighed 22 pounds, but its curved shape distributed weight efficiently. Legionaries could march 20 miles and still form a wall on command. At Alesia in 52 BCE, Caesar's men built a shield wall that held against 80,000 Gallic warriors. The testudo formation, shields overhead and interlocked on all sides, turned entire centuries into armored boxes that could advance under arrow fire. Trajan's column in Rome shows this in carved detail. Legionaries advancing with shields raised, the bronze boss punching forward to create space, gladius striking through gaps. The boss itself served as a weapon. Tacitus describes legionaries at Mons Graupius in 83 CE using shield edges to batter Caledonian faces, then stabbing upward with short swords. Each scutum bore the legion's emblem, the eagle, the boar, the thunderbolt, painted in unit colors that identified soldiers in the chaos of battle. The Kite Shield. The Kite Shield tapers from shoulders to knees. It measures roughly 4 feet in length, constructed from wooden planks covered in leather and reinforced with iron bands. The Bayeux Tapestry, stitched within a generation of 1066, depicts hundreds of these shields in battle at Hastings, pointed ovals that covered Norman knights from neck to shin. This shape revolutionized mounted combat. Earlier round shields offered poor leg protection for horsemen. The Kite Shield's extended point guarded the left leg, while the right remained behind the horse's body. William the Conqueror's cavalry charged uphill at Senlac Ridge with these shields deflecting Saxon spears and axes. The tapestry shows the progression. Norman knights couching lances behind shield rims, absorbing impacts, then closing for sword work. Harold Godwinson's housecarls wielded Danish axes that could split shields. The tapestry depicts splintered wood and fallen knights. Archaeological finds from Battle Abbey show the construction, lime wood or poplar, sometimes 4 planks wide, bound with animal glue and covered in boiled leather. Paint gave identification, crosses, stripes, animals, though these weren't yet formalized heraldry. The Museum of London holds fragments with red and yellow pigment still visible. By the 12th century, every mounted warrior in Europe carried a kite shield. They appear in the Winchester Bible, the Maciejowski Bible, carved on church doorways across Normandy. The shape allowed lance charges that dominated warfare for 2 centuries. Richard I's cavalry at Arsuf in 1191 used kite shields to break Saladin's mounted archers, absorbing arrow fire before closing distance. The Pavise. The Pavise stands 6 feet tall. Genoese crossbowmen carried these massive wooden shields throughout the 14th and 15th centuries, propping them in the ground to create portable fortifications. You can see surviving examples in Prague Castle. Tall rectangles with pointed tops, painted with civic heraldry and religious imagery. Crossbows required both hands and took 30 seconds to reload. The Pavise solved this vulnerability. At Crécy in 1346, Genoese mercenaries planted their pavises and began shooting, but they'd left their shields in the baggage train during a forced march. English longbowmen cut them down before they could reload. Froissart's chronicle records the disaster, crossbowmen fleeing through French cavalry lines, creating chaos that led to slaughter. When properly deployed, pavises worked. At the Siege of Orléans in 1429, English archers used pavises to hold fortified positions against French attacks. The shields created temporary walls, allowing shooters to reload in safety. Czech Hussites perfected the technique in the 1420s, arranging pavises on wagons to form mobile fortresses. Their wagon forts, called vozová hradba, stopped cavalry charges and allowed handgunners to fire from behind wooden protection. The Museum of Military History in Vienna holds Hussite pavises decorated with chalices and religious mottos. These weren't just battlefield equipment, they were propaganda, painted to intimidate and inspire. Italian city-states commissioned elaborate designs. Mantua's pavises bore the Gonzaga coat of arms. The Pavise became both weapon and banner, identifying units and creating psychological impact through sheer visual presence. The Targe. The Targe measures 18 to 21 inches in diameter. Highland Scots carried these small round shields into the 18th century, constructing them from 2 layers of oak boards covered in studded leather. The Scottish National Museum holds dozens of surviving examples, some decorated with intricate Celtic patterns, silver bosses, and brass nails arranged in geometric designs. This shield paired with the Highland charge. Jacobite warriors gripped the targe in the left hand, a broadsword in the right, and sometimes concealed a dirk behind the shield's boss for close-quarter stabbing. At Killiecrankie in 1689, Highland clansmen absorbed the first volley from government muskets on their targes, then closed before soldiers could reload. John Graham of Claverhouse led the charge that broke the government line in minutes. The Targe's small size required aggressive tactics. You couldn't hide behind it like a Scutum or Hoplon. Instead, Highlanders used it to deflect and punch, creating openings for the basket-hilted broadsword. Contemporary accounts describe the technique: advancing at a run, crouch behind the targe, then rising to strike. At Prestonpans in 1745, Jacobite Highlanders routed government troops in less than 10 minutes using this method. Culloden in 1746 ended the targe's military use. Government artillery and disciplined musket volleys shattered the Highland charge before it could close distance. The Duke of Cumberland's troops fixed bayonets and fired in rotation, creating continuous volleys that killed clansmen before they reached the line. Surviving targes now hang in Scottish collections, relics of a fighting style rendered obsolete by industrial warfare. The buckler. The buckler fits in one fist. These small shields, 8 to 16 inches across, dominated civilian combat from the 13th through 17th centuries. Made from wood, steel, or brass, they featured a central grip and often a protruding spike for offensive strikes. The Royal Armouries in Leeds displays Italian and German examples with elaborate etching and gild marks. Renaissance fencing manuals treat the buckler as essential. Achille Marozzo's Opera Nova, published in Venice in 1536, devotes entire chapters to buckler and sword combinations. The buckler didn't block like larger shields. Fencers used it to deflect, bind, and punch. The protruding boss could strike faces or trap enemy blades. English law in the 1500s required apprentices to train with sword and buckler, making it the most common civilian weapon combination in Europe. George Silver's 1599 treatise, Paradoxes of Defense, argues the buckler's superiority over the newly fashionable rapier. He demonstrates techniques, using the buckler to beat aside thrusts, while the sword cuts from unexpected angles. The Wallace Collection in London holds a German buckler from 1580 with a spring-loaded blade that could be triggered to extend outward, turning defense into a surprise attack. Judicial duels featured bucklers well into the 17th century. A 1613 English trial by combat saw 2 men fight with sword and buckler until one died from wounds. Shakespeare references bucklers in Romeo and Juliet. Samson bites his thumb, which sparks a sword and buckler brawl. The buckler vanished as rapiers lengthened and firearms spread, but for 3 centuries it defined European street fighting. the heater shield. The heater shield takes its name from its shape, resembling a flat iron used to heat clothes. These shields dominated European warfare from the mid-13th through 15th centuries, measuring roughly 30 inches tall and 24 inches wide at the top, tapering to a point. The Metropolitan Museum holds examples from across Europe, wooden cores covered in gesso and painted with the owner's coat of arms. The heater shield emerged as armor improved. Full plate protection reduced the need for large shields, allowing smaller, lighter designs. Knights could wield longer swords or two-handed weapons while maintaining defensive capability. The shield became primarily a heraldic display, identifying warriors in the chaos of melee. At Agincourt in 1415, English and French knights carried heater shields emblazoned with family arms: the three leopards of England, the fleur-de-lis of France, the crosses and chevrons of noble houses. Tournaments codified the heater shield's decorative function. The Codex Manesse, a 14th century German manuscript, illustrates jousting knights with elaborately painted shields. These weren't battlefield pragmatism. They were social statements, displaying lineage and allegiance. The College of Arms in London maintains rolls recording which families bore which designs, systems that grew directly from shields painted for war. By 1500, the heater shield had become ceremonial. Full-plate armor eliminated the need for shields in battle, but they persisted in pageantry, hung in churches and great halls, painted on tombs and monuments. Westminster Abbey displays the funeral achievements of medieval knights, shields hanging above their tombs, heraldry preserved in wood and paint, commemorating warriors who carried these designs into battle centuries before. The Adarga. The Adarga curves around the arm in an asymmetrical heart or kidney shape. Moorish cavalry in Spain and North Africa developed these shields from layered leather, usually from bulls or antelopes, hardened through boiling and compression. Spanish conquistadors adopted them in the Americas, finding them lighter and more practical than steel in humid climates. The Museum of the Americas in Madrid displays examples brought back from New Spain. This shield weighs only 3 to 5 pounds, far less than wooden or metal alternatives. 2 hand grips, one at the center, one at the edge, allowed riders to control horses while maintaining defense. The leather construction flexed rather than shattered, absorbing sword strikes and deflecting arrows. At the Battle of Rio Salado in 1340, Moorish cavalry used adargas against Castilian knights, their mobility compensating for lighter armor. In the Americas, Spanish horsemen fighting against indigenous warriors found the adarga ideal. It didn't rust in tropical humidity. It could be repaired with local materials. Conquistadors facing Aztec obsidian-edged macuahuitl or Incan bronze weapons needed flexibility more than rigid defense. Bernal Diaz del Castillo's Chronicle of the Conquest of Mexico mentions Spanish cavalry with adargas absorbing volleys of atlatl darts. The adarga persisted in Spanish cavalry regiments into the 17th century, even as the rest of Europe abandoned shields entirely. Portuguese colonial troops in Angola and Mozambique carried leather shields based on the adarga design. The shield represented adaptation, taking an enemy innovation, refining it, and deploying it across oceans in entirely new contexts of warfare.